She stood in the middle of Bleecker Street, a little girl clutching an old, tarnished bracelet, holding it up to a man in a sharp gray suit. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady, heartbreakingly steady. "Sir, can you help my brother? This is all we have left." The man stopped in his tracks. Morning sunlight flickered against the small gold charm in her hand, worn and dulled by time. He recognized it instantly. His heart skipped a beat. That bracelet, it had belonged to Rachel, the only woman he had ever truly loved. The one who vanished 8 years ago, without a single word, as if she had never existed. Daniel Grant was not the kind of man who faltered. As CEO of a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, he didn't flinch at numbers, didn't blink under pressure. But in that moment, on a crowded sidewalk filled with honking taxis and rushing strangers, he was frozen in place by a barefoot child holding a piece of his forgotten past. "My name is Sophie. My brother is Noah. Mommy's asleep forever at the hospital. No one came for us." Each word hit him like a hammer to the chest. Every sentence cracked open a world he thought he had long buried. He looked at the girl, those pale blue eyes, clear, steady, familiar, just like the eyes he saw every morning in the mirror. Could she be his child? No one in the crowd stopped. No one noticed. But Daniel couldn't walk away, because sometimes fate doesn't arrive with thunder or applause. Sometimes it's just a child holding out an old bracelet and asking one question: "Can you help us?" Daniel didn't know when he had knelt down. Maybe it was the moment he saw her tiny bare feet trembling in the cold New York morning. He looked at her open palm, the bracelet resting there like a fragile fragment of memory, something pulled straight from a dream he had tried to forget for 8 long years. The engraving inside was still intact. "Wherever you go, my heart follows." He had carved those words himself. He remembered that night. Rachel had smiled as he clasped the bracelet around her wrist, her eyes glimmering under the soft light. She whispered, "If I ever disappear, this bracelet will be how you find me again." He laughed then, but the next morning, she was gone. No note, no calls, no trace. And now, that very bracelet was lying in the hand of a little girl. A stranger, or maybe not quite. Daniel reached out to take it. His hand trembled, something it hadn't done in 8 years. "What's your name?" "Sophie. My brother's Noah. We don't have anyone. And your mom? She's at the hospital, but they won't let us stay." Sophie paused, then leaned in closer. "I think she's not waking up anymore." Daniel stared at her, those soft gray-blue eyes, shimmering with tears. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was just telling the truth, plain, raw, and heartbreakingly alone. He looked down at Noah, the boy clinging to his sister's leg, his cheeks hollow, his curly hair tangled and dry. What had these children survived? To end up here, on Bleecker Street, offering the last thing they had left, for just one warm meal. Daniel didn't ask anything more. He stood, waved for a cab. The children didn't ask, "Where are we going?" They didn't act surprised. They just followed, like they'd done it before, like they knew good people always left. But this time was different. Daniel knew. He had no plans to walk away. The black SUV glided past Washington Square. Sunlight spilled through the windows, landing gently on Sophie's face as she drifted to sleep, arms wrapped protectively around her little brother. Daniel didn't take his eyes off the bracelet in his hand. It had found its way back to him, and it had brought the children too. The SUV pulled up in front of a small hotel on 74th Street, not far from Central Park. It wasn't the kind of place Daniel usually stayed at. Nothing fancy, no gold-plated lobbies or rooftop bars. But it was warm, quiet, and just enough away from the world that might swallow 2 small kids whole. He leaned forward, opening the door, and gently offered his hand to Sophie. She blinked awake, confused for a moment, then instinctively tightened her grip on her little brother's hand. We don't need a big room," she said, her voice no louder than a whisper. Daniel paused. "You deserve a decent place to sleep," he replied quietly. The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and warm toast. While Daniel checked in, Sophie stood silently at his side, one hand holding Noah's, the other still clutching the bracelet, never letting go. He noticed something. She kept glancing toward the door. Not out of curiosity. It was the kind of look you give when you're waiting for something to come back, or for something bad to follow you in. They took the elevator upstairs, a modest room with 2 twin beds and a wide window looking down on a tree-lined street. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean, safe, with a lock on the door. Daniel set their things down, then turned to Sophie. Sophie, would you like to call the hospital? Ask about your mom. She looked up, slowly shook her head. I already did. They said she's in a deep sleep, like in the movies. But nobody came for us. So we just kept waiting. Noah had climbed onto one of the beds, curling up like a kitten. No words, no tears, just quietly pulling his sister's sleeve over his cheek. Daniel sat down by the window, the bracelet still clutched tightly in his hand. He was in deeper than he ever planned. But strangely, he didn't want to get out. After a simple dinner, toast, eggs, and steamed broccoli from room service, he sat down across from them. Sophie, he asked gently, do you know who your dad is? She studied him for a long time, then answered softly, Mom never said, just that he was a good man, but they got separated. She hid the bracelet in a music box. Noah found it after she went to the hospital. Daniel swallowed hard. That bracelet, it wasn't just jewelry. It was a promise, a story unfinished. He stayed quiet for a long while. Sophie, would you take me to the hospital tomorrow? To see your mom? She nodded. Tomorrow morning. But are you sure, mister? He looked her straight in the eyes that looked a little too much like his own. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning, New York was as loud and restless as ever. But inside Daniel, every sound felt distant, as if someone had pressed mute on the city. All he could hear was the weight in his chest. Anticipation, fear, and something heavier. Redemption. Sophie sat quietly beside him in the car, her hands still wrapped tightly around Noah's. The golden bracelet on her wrist shimmered under the morning light. Daniel glanced at it, then at the rearview mirror. Noah was staring out the window, his face still thoughtful, like a boy born already familiar with the shape of loss. They pulled up to Brooklyn Medical Center. Not the fanciest hospital, but one that could keep someone like Rachel alive, if she still wanted to be. Sophie led the way like someone far older than 7. No complaints, no hesitation. She knew every turn, every hallway, as if she'd walked them 100 times, hoping someone would finally show up. The room was at the end of the 6th floor corridor. Daniel stopped at the door. His palms were damp. He didn't know if he was ready, didn't know if he deserved this moment. But he knew one thing. If he didn't walk in now, he might never forgive himself. Sophie pushed the door open. Rachel lay there, small, pale, a ghost of memory wrapped in sheets and silence. For lines, heart monitor, the soft beep, beep, a room both alive and dying all at once. Daniel stepped forward slowly. His hand trembled as he reached for hers, cold, dry, and weightless as air. Rachel, his voice cracked, barely above a whisper, an apology spoken after years of silence. She didn't respond, but the heart monitor jumped, just once. He sat down beside her, started talking, about the night they broke apart, about the bracelet, about the years he spent trying to forget, then trying to remember, then trying to live like he'd never loved anyone at all. Sophie stood beside him, eyes tight with unspoken hope. Mom, we're here. I'm Sophie. This is Noah. Do you remember us? No answer, but a single tear slid from Rachel's eye. Daniel gripped her hand tighter. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Whether you wake up or not, I'll be here. For them. I promise. And in that fragile stillness, Rachel's finger twitched. Barely, but unmistakably. Sophie gasped. Daniel bowed his head, pressing her hand to his forehead, as if it were something sacred. No words could hold this moment, only the belief that this wasn't the end, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something fragile and real. They left the hospital as the sun climbed higher into the sky. Daniel couldn't remember the last time daylight felt like this. Slow, deliberate, as if time itself was waiting for him, to choose something bigger than himself. Sophie was quiet, but her eyes no longer looked lost. She sat in the car, one hand clasped tightly around Noah's. The little boy had fallen asleep on Daniel's shoulder the moment they stepped out of the hospital, his mouth still dusted with crumbs from the tiny snack pack a nurse had handed him. Daniel looked down at that small sleeping face, and for the first time in his life, he understood something beyond words. He was the only one standing between them and the world. That same afternoon, he met with his attorney, Karen Whitman, a sharp-eyed, middle-aged black woman with a voice that somehow held both steel and warmth. She listened, start to finish, never interrupting. Daniel's voice cracked in places he didn't expect. When he spoke of Rachel, of Sophie, of Noah, of the bracelet. I can't prove anything yet, besides the bracelet and their eyes. But I know. They're mine. Karen nodded slowly. Then that's where we start. There are ways to run a DNA test, quickly. But we need to move fast. If those kids don't have a legal guardian, CPS could step in any day now. Daniel clenched his fists. I won't let anyone take them from me. Karen studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Then I won't let them either. The next morning, they went to the DNA testing center. Sophie didn't ask questions. She just followed Daniel's lead. Quiet, compliant, maybe too used to being evaluated. Examined, measured. When the technician reached for her hand, Daniel reached too. And for the first time, Sophie squeezed his back. Not out of fear, but something else. Something like trust. If the test says yes, does that mean I belong to you? She asked. Daniel's throat tightened. No, the test is just paper. But I've already made my choice. You and Noah, you're my family. With or without the paper. Sophie looked at him for a long time. Then nodded. Then I'll believe you. That night, back at the hotel, Daniel sat at the edge of the bed. The phone on the table was ringing. He already knew who it was. His father. The man who once told him, emotion weakens men. Focus on things that matter, money, power, control. Daniel didn't call to be judged. He called to draw a line. I have kids now. 2 of them. If you're going to tell me I'm wrong, go ahead. But I'm not coming back. Because I just found something you've never understood. A reason to exist that isn't tied to an office. It's sleeping in the next room. He hung up. Didn't wait for a reply. Later that night, he sat beside their bed, watching them breathe. 2 tiny souls finally safe. In his hand was the bracelet. Gold, glowing softly under the nightlight. We're about to start a fight, he whispered, as if Rachel could still hear him from wherever she was. And I won't lose. Not this time. Monday morning. Courtroom 7, Manhattan Family Court. The room was packed. On the right, representatives from Child Services. Men and women in suits, holding folders, speaking in cold words like risk, temporary custody, and unstable environment. On the left, Daniel Grant. No assistant, no PR team, just a man in a white dress shirt, holding the hand of a little girl named Sophie. And behind him, a small boy clutching a teddy bear, hiding behind his sister. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and eyes that carried both firmness and quiet sorrow, scanned the case file, then looked at the 3 people before her. She sighed. Mr. Grant, you're requesting custody of 2 children. There's no marriage record. No shared birth certificates. No legal precedent. Why should I believe this isn't just an emotional impulse? Daniel stepped forward. His voice was steady, quiet, but it didn't waver. I have hundreds of degrees, awards, billion-dollar contracts, but not one of them ever taught me how to hold a hungry, freezing child, who still stood tall to ask for food for her little brother. Sophie didn't need me to believe her. She just needed me not to walk away. And I didn't. I won't. A heavy silence fell over the room. Karen, Daniel's lawyer, stood and handed over the DNA results. The judge examined them, read, then gave a small nod. The results confirm Mr. Grant is Sophie's biological father. But the boy? Daniel raised his head. No blood relation. But I don't care. Because blood doesn't make a family. Choice does. Responsibility does. Outside, rain began to fall. Soft taps against the window, like a heartbeat held in waiting. Sophie didn't cry, but her hand tightened around Daniel's so hard her knuckles turned white. He felt it, and leaned down to whisper, "It's okay. I'm here. We wait together, all right?" When the judge finally read her ruling, her voice was slow, deliberate, like she wanted every word to land fully. The court grants temporary guardianship. Mr. Daniel Grant is hereby approved to care for Sophie as her legal father, and for Noah as his designated guardian, until a final decision is made. Daniel exhaled, relief not as sound, but as a full-body release. Sophie didn't understand every word, but she understood this. They weren't being taken away. Not today. Noah turned to his sister and whispered, "We don't have to go anywhere now, right?" Sophie bent down, pulled him close, and whispered back, "We have a home now." That night, back at the hotel, Daniel's phone rang. "It's the hospital," the voice on the line said. Ms. Rachel showed a stronger response. She blinked when we said Sophie's name. Daniel didn't change clothes. He grabbed Noah in one arm, took Sophie's hand, and ran out the door. No one spoke during the drive, but inside each of them, hope had started to bloom, quietly but strong. And for Daniel, it was the first time in his life. He didn't feel like a bystander in his own story. He was in it now, for real, and he wasn't going anywhere. The hospital room was quiet. The monitor beeped steadily, each soft sound marking time with gentle insistence. White walls, pale blue light, stillness so complete, every footstep seemed to echo like thunder. Daniel stood at the edge of the bed. Sophie sat in a chair, clutching her mother's hand. And Noah, still small, still unsure, leaned silently against Daniel's leg, as if instinctively knowing this was a moment too sacred to disturb. And then slowly, as if rising through a thick, dreamless fog, Rachel opened her eyes. The overhead light glinted off her dark brown pupils. They weren't as bright as they once were, but they were awake, and Daniel knew instantly. She had come back. Rachel's gaze wandered in confusion for a moment, then landed on Sophie's face. "Sophie?" Her voice cracked, raspy. The little girl nodded again and again, tears spilling freely down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "I'm here, Mom. Me and Noah, we're okay now. We have a home." Daniel stepped forward. His eyes met Rachel's, and in that gaze, 7 years of abandonment, anger, longing, all rose at once. "Why?" His voice was so quiet it barely made a sound. Rachel blinked slowly. When she opened her eyes again, they were deeper, wearier. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that if you found out, you'd do the right thing. You'd marry me, but not out of love, out of duty." Daniel took a step back, like her words had struck him physically. Rachel swallowed hard, glanced at Sophie, then back at him. "I knew if I told you, you'd give up everything. Your career, your life. I couldn't be the reason you lost who you were." Daniel clenched his fists, took in a sharp breath. "So you ran. You let a child be born without a father. You faced all of it alone, and you thought that was better? Better for who?" Rachel looked at him, and for the first time, fire flickered in her tired eyes. "I thought it was better for you." The silence in the room stretched, tense and taut like a wire about to snap. Sophie listened. She didn't understand everything, but she felt it. This was the place where past and present collided. Daniel turned to look at his daughter, then back at Rachel, his voice softer now. "I'm not the man I used to be. I don't need protecting anymore. I just need to know, did you ever believe I could have been a father?" Rachel didn't answer right away. But then, tears slid quietly down her cheek, soaking the pillow, and she gave the smallest of nods. A nod that broke something, and healed something, all at once. That night, Daniel sat beside the hospital bed. Both children were fast asleep on the visitors' chairs, limbs tangled. Rachel lay resting under the lull of medication. The room was still, but inside Daniel, something had shifted. He no longer needed to search for explanations. He didn't need all the answers, because now, he knew exactly where he was, and more importantly, who he was there for. A week had passed since Rachel opened her eyes. She was awake, speaking again. But Daniel knew, waking up didn't mean coming back. Rachel was like someone emerging from a long dream, only to find the world had changed in her absence. Sophie was older now, more composed, her eyes always scanning, always protecting her brother, rather than seeking protection from her mother. Noah didn't call her mom anymore, just Miss Rachel, only approaching her occasionally, as if afraid she might break if he got too close. And Daniel, he was still there, every morning at the hospital, every afternoon, taking the kids to school, cooking, reading stories, tucking them into bed, as if he'd been doing it all his life. That afternoon, when Daniel set a bowl of hot soup on the tray, Rachel looked up quietly. "You're good at this. Not just making money, but cutting carrots into star shapes too." Daniel smiled. "YouTube taught me. There's a little girl who only eats carrots shaped like fun things." Rachel paused. Her heart tightened. "Sophie, she never spoke badly of you," Daniel cut in gently. "But sometimes she looks at me like she's testing whether this person will disappear, just like the others did." Silence hung between them. "Are you angry?" Rachel asked, her voice so low it was almost a breath. Daniel looked at her. So long, she had to look away. "I was. But then I realized, if you hadn't disappeared, I wouldn't have met my daughter like this. Wouldn't have learned how to be a father. Wouldn't have known what I was missing. So, I don't know if it's anger or gratitude." Rachel's eyes welled up. That evening, Daniel took Sophie to the park. They sat beneath a wide tree, golden light from the sunset pooling across the ground. "Daddy," Sophie asked, "if Mom gets better, will you forgive her?" Daniel looked at her, eyes just like Rachel's from years ago, only now they carried something deeper, a kind of wisdom only loss can teach. I won't forgive with words. I'll forgive by staying. With you. With her. Every day. Sophie nodded. Maybe she didn't understand it all, but the way she reached for his hand, warm and steady, was all he needed. That night, Rachel stirred awake from a deep sleep. Daniel sat beside her, reading by the soft bedside light. Daniel. He looked up. I think if you still want, maybe I could learn to be a mom again. With you. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood, took her hand. No promises. No conditions. Just a warm hand. In a white hospital room, where a family that once thought they were lost had begun to find each other again. 3 weeks after Rachel woke up, the hospital room felt different. Gone was the overpowering scent of antiseptic, or the heavy silence of a soul trying to find its way back. Now the room echoed with soft laughter, the gentle clink of a spoon in a bowl, and every so often, the steady voice of a little girl reading fairy tales aloud. Rachel was healing slowly but surely. She could sit up on her own, hold a glass of water. Her eyes, once foggy with exhaustion, now lit up, especially when they landed on her children. That night, Daniel got a call. A multi-million-dollar project, an executive position in San Francisco, a once-in-a-lifetime offer. We need you to start next week, said the manager. Your flight's booked. Hotel's ready. Just say yes. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked over at Sophie, coloring quietly by the window, at Rachel, bracing herself as she practiced standing beside the bed, at Noah, asleep with his cheek pressed to a tiny pillow, hugging the stuffed animal Sophie had given him. He spoke slowly into the phone. I know this is a huge opportunity, but I only have one family. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure? This could change your entire future. Daniel exhaled. Exactly. And I just found my future. She's right in front of me, wearing a yellow sweater, coloring a panda bear. The next day, he didn't mention the call to Rachel. But she knew. You didn't take the job, did you? She asked quietly as dusk fell. No. I don't want to be far from the only place that's ever felt like home. Rachel looked at him, eyes glistening. I'm scared I cost you everything. Daniel shook his head. No. You gave me something no opportunity could ever replace. A family. A second chance. A week later, Rachel was discharged. Daniel carried Noah. Rachel walked slowly beside him. And Sophie held her mother's hand, for the first time in a long time. The black SUV waited outside the hospital entrance. Rachel looked up at the sky, sunlight spilling across her hair. Where are you taking me? She asked. Daniel smiled, nodding ahead. Home. It's just a small apartment, but there's room for 3 people. 1 stuffed bear, and a whole bunch of new dreams. Hoi ChatGPT. The new apartment in Brooklyn wasn't big, but it was full of light. Daniel chose it because of the tiny balcony that overlooked the park, and because of the way Sophie's face lit up when she saw the gas stove. Just like in the cartoons, she'd said. Rachel had her own room. Sophie and Noah shared one. And Daniel, he laid a mattress on the living room floor each night. Like a silent promise. Dad's here. I'm not going anywhere. Each morning, they ate breakfast together. Toast. Eggs. Milk. Sophie loved setting the table. Rachel practiced walking around the kitchen. Noah only needed someone to hold him. Life slowly settled into a rhythm that almost felt like peace. But then, on a quiet Friday afternoon, everything shifted. Daniel was picking Sophie up from school when his phone rang. It was a doctor from Rachel's old hospital. We've reviewed her follow-up scans. There's an old clot in her brain. If we don't operate soon, the chance of recurrence is high. Daniel's heart stopped. Is it risky? He asked, voice raw. Survival rate is 70%, but memory may not return. She could forget everything, even the children. Daniel gripped the steering wheel. Sophie walked out of the school gates, holding a drawing, 3 people, 2 red hearts, and the words, my home. He wasn't just afraid of losing Rachel. He was afraid of losing her again. That night, when Rachel heard the news, she went quiet. If I forget everything? She asked, eyes fixed on the table. Would you still stay? Daniel came beside her, placed his hand gently over hers. I'll love you again from the beginning if I have to. I have time, and so do the kids. Rachel broke down in tears. The surgery was scheduled for 1 week later. On the day of the operation, Sophie held her mother's hand tightly at the door to the OR. You might forget us, Mommy, but I'll remind you, every little thing. I promise. Rachel leaned down, wrapped both her children in her frail arms. I'll try to remember. But if I can't, thank you for staying with me. Even if I'm no longer myself. Daniel stood behind them, eyes rimmed red. He said nothing, only reached out and placed the golden bracelet into Rachel's palm. If you forget everything, let this remind you, you were once loved, and you will be loved again every single day. Hoi ChatGPT. That morning, New York moved at its usual frantic pace. But for Daniel, Sophie, and Noah, time had frozen. Rachel's surgery began at 7:45 a.m. A long row of cold chairs lined the hallway outside the operating room, and the wall clock seemed to stretch each second into a lifetime. Daniel didn't sit. He paced between windows, thumb gently rubbing the worn pendant he'd once engraved for Rachel. The last piece left from a younger, simpler time. Sophie curled into a chair, holding Noah tightly. She didn't cry, but her eyes, aged years in a single morning. Quiet, brave, but breaking. At 11:12 a.m., the doors finally swung open. A young surgeon stepped out, soaked in sweat. The surgery was successful. We removed the clot. Daniel froze. Sophie's head shot up. Does she remember us? He asked, voice cracking. The doctor shook his head gently. We can't know yet. Memory might return, or not. What she needs most now is time. And patient love. Daniel nodded. And for the first time in years, he cried. Not from loss, but from hope. 2 days later, Rachel opened her eyes. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just looked around the white room with quiet confusion. Daniel stepped closer, sat at her side, and gently took her hand. Do you know who I am? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She looked at him, then slowly shook her head. Daniel nodded. No panic, no rush, just love, steady waiting. I'm Daniel, the guy who once made you laugh by cutting carrots into star shapes. She glanced at his hand, then down at the golden bracelet in her palm. Slowly, she curled her fingers around it. It feels strange, but familiar. That afternoon, Sophie was allowed to visit. She ran to her mother's bedside, stood straight, a little warrior with nothing to fear. I'm Sophie, your daughter. I'll tell you everything, Mom. All over again. Rachel didn't respond at first, but when Sophie reached for her hand, Rachel whispered, almost without realizing it. This hand drew pandas once, didn't it? Daniel and the doctor both froze. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She nodded hard. Yes, you remember? Rachel blinked slowly. Not exactly, but my heart remembers. That night, the family returned to their small Brooklyn apartment. Rachel hadn't recovered all her memories, but she smiled more, touched Daniel's hand longer, and when Sophie rested her head on her mother's shoulder, she whispered, if you forget again, I'll tell the story again, and again, as many times as it takes. Rachel didn't answer with words. She just smiled and pulled her daughter close, not with memory, but with the kind of love a mother never truly loses. 3 weeks after the surgery, Rachel sat by the window. Morning light poured over her soft brown hair, now thinner after weeks of silence. In her hands, she held a small photo album, prints that Daniel and Sophie had made together, each one labeled in careful, childlike handwriting. This was the day you took me to the park for the first time. This is the cake you taught me to bake. I burned it once. Rachel didn't remember everything, but with each new page, something inside her heart fluttered. Familiar, tender, almost known. Sophie sat beside her, holding Noah, who had fallen asleep in her lap. She no longer carried the wariness of a girl forced to grow up too fast. Now she smiled more, freer, finally allowed to be a child, the way a child is meant to be. Daniel brought over 2 cups of tea and sat beside Rachel. I don't need you to remember everything, he said, his voice as soft as the morning breeze. I just need you to know we can start again, one day at a time. Rachel didn't answer. She simply leaned her head on his shoulder. A habit, perhaps, her memory hadn't yet let go of. That morning, Sophie went to school for the first time. She wore a sky blue dress, her hair tied back by Rachel's hands with a small white bow. At the school gate, she turned around and looked back at them. Daniel and Rachel, standing side by side. You'll pick me up, right? She asked. Daniel nodded. I'll always be here. And Sophie smiled. A real smile. One free of the fear of growing up too soon. Free of the weight of protecting her mother. She turned and stepped through the school gates. A small step, but the beginning of an entirely new life. That night, Daniel stood on the balcony, gazing out at the glowing city skyline. He thought about the man he'd been just a month ago, the cold, polished executive in a gray suit, who would have walked right past destiny on Bleecker Street, if not for a little girl with a worn gold bracelet and a trembling voice that asked, "Can you help my brother?" He pulled the bracelet from his pocket, now polished and gleaming once again. Inside, the words still etched, still true. Time can never part us. And Daniel knew he would keep that promise, not with grand gestures, but by simply showing up, every single day. If you've ever thought that small choices can't change a life, remember the girl on Bleecker Street. Sometimes all it takes is stopping, really seeing someone, hearing a voice that doesn't ask for much, and you might become someone's miracle. Share this story if it touched your heart. Like if you believe love can begin again, even from the hardest places. Subscribe so you never miss stories that remind us what it means to be human. Because sometimes all we need is one story to believe in the good again.